Welcome to the podcast The Embodiment Talks, a podcast by the Embodiment Lab with Marion van Opijnen. Taking your role as change agent of societal or education systems requires vision and courage. This podcast will help you take this pioneer's role with more body awareness and confidence, without losing sight of the connection with others. We dive into how we as humans are hardwired, how systems change works, and how both are related. I will take you on my own quest, and I will share background information, talk to experts, and share exercises. We will think, feel, and act. Great that you're here, and happy listening. Hi there. Great that you're listening to this fourth podcast of the Embodiment Talks. And today I'd like to talk about the need of embodiment in societal systems change. To be able to do that, I need to dive a little bit deeper into what systems actually are, so that we have a little bit of better understanding of what I'm talking about when I talk about systems change. And then I can actually link that to embodiment. It's kind of also the last podcast in which I'd like to frame the topic that this podcast is about. So in the previous one I was talking about embodiment, and in this one I'm linking it to societal systems change. And then from there on in my future episodes I will dive deeper into either one of those topics or bring them together in a more detailed way. But anyway, then we have a kind of a framework from which I'm talking. But as I always do, I like to start with my pearl of my daily life. And this time I like to talk about trees. And I was walking in the forest, and there were quite a few trees that actually fell down. And when we were looking at the root network of those trees, we saw that they were rather small. And that indicated that the groundwater was rather high in that area. And when the groundwater is high, the trees don't need very long root networks to get their food. So it's actually an easy life. But because there were so many trees that fell down, it also shows how that easy lives makes them vulnerable. I also drew the conclusion from this that setbacks are actually very important in the survival. So if the groundwater for the trees would be lower, it actually meant that they had to work harder to get their roots to the groundwater and how to get food. That would enhance their survival because their fundament would be stronger, and they would have a stronger attachment to the ground. And that also is a nice bridge to dive deeper into systems, because this whole ground and the trees, everything together is a system. We of course call that the ecosystem, but it is a system. So what makes a system? A system is all different parts that you hear. You have the ground, you have the water, the groundwater, you have the trees, you have the plants, the animals, everything that all together kind of makes that the tree can flourish in that ecosystem. If there's anything lacking, that would mean that the tree may get a problem, or if anything is like, for example, in this case where the groundwater is high, that actually makes it vulnerable. So what I often see when we talk about systems, that we tend to confuse that with systematic. But systematic is pretty structured. It's methodical, and there is a possibility that we can understand something that is systematical, that has different stages. And if we follow those different stages, then that means that we get to an end. Just to give you an example, when we are assembling a car, although it's you have to study for that and it's not easy, we still can make procedures. Like if you start with A and then you do B and then you do C, and then in the end you actually have a car. So it's complicated, but it's not complex. That is what systematic is about. We kind of can design a procedure. However, if we talk about systems, and especially as I do in this podcast, societal systems, then we're talking about complex systems. And in a complex system, there is individuals that interact together, and they're all connected in the networks, and they have a certain collective behavior in the system that arises from those interactions between those individuals in the system. An example of that is, for example, herd behavior on the stock market, or spreading opinions and that are being followed. And so there are many different systems that we see. Just to stay with that car. So if we have a car, like, although the assembly is complicated but doable in a structured and systematic way, driving the car isn't. So if I'm driving the car in the Netherlands, where I'm based, where I'm living, then we have certain behavior. We have collective behavior on the roads, and some is put in legislation or in regulations, but some is also just the way how we kind of interact on the street. So if I'm on the motorway and somebody wants to move to another lane, I may give way to it, or I might go a little bit faster so that the person can go behind me, or something like that. So I will anticipate the behavior of the other person. Which will be completely different if I would drive this car in Jakarta, where the collective behavior on the roads is completely different from on the Dutch roads. There are different rules, regulations, and some are also written down in legislation, and some are just those unwritten rules that, just exist because that's we know how we interact, and they kind of come into existence, which can't be predicted before. So that is what complex systems is about as well. It can't be predicted before what the actual outcome is, because those social interactions between the individuals are undercurrent. It's hard to kind of give words to that. So what are examples of systems? We have, for example, ecosystems. That's what I started with the trees. We have social networks, social media, but also our friends' networks or student networks, or at work or in your neighborhood or something like that. The economy is a system as well, or the tech system. They're all complex systems. So they partly have rules and regulations, but a lot of the outcomes of the system is determined by the invisible interactions between the different actors in that system. So a system is not a simple chain of cause-effect relations. It's actually the interplay between all the interacting subsystems. And through those interacting subsystems, there's like whole feedback loops as well that gives us information whether we're going to the right direction. But as you can imagine, that those feedback loops have a certain delay. So it was much later that we discovered that the way how we're producing had an effect on the climate than the moment where the actual effect started. So it takes quite a long time before it really gets visible. And what I often see is as well that we kind of tend to pinpoint to the system, or it's them doing that, or but we are part of that as well by already like consuming something, buying something, by making it for this podcast, just whatever. I'm always part of the system, and I embody that system. I can't just exclude myself from the system because it's in me. It's part of our culture. It's part of my culture, and that, therefore it's also like different for people maybe from other countries. So currently we see that there really is a call for social systems change, and it's called transformation, or they say like, we have come to that tipping point where we really need to come to change. And we see these kind of notions and strategies of governments, of the of companies. So the call for systems change has never been that clear as it currently is. Because we all understand that the way how we produce, how we work, how we travel, how we eat, it's not sustainable. And we're really bounding into the limits of the planet. More and more we understand that we need to do things radically different. However, what we tend to do is we tend to develop individual, isolated solutions for isolated problems. But many of the problems that we currently face, like, for example, climate change, environmental pollution, inequality, poverty, exhaustion of resources, they're not isolated problems. And they don't have one cause. It's actually a very complex interplay between many different factors. So when we try to isolate them, we're very sure that we're not coming up with the solutions that we want. And also, it doesn't bring us to the root causes of why this actually is a problem, because most of those problems that we currently face are unintentional side effects of something else. And that is the way how we organize our society, how we organize and structure our economy, and many other systems. Our current problems are unintentional and undesired consequences of the way how we live and how we produce and how we consume and organize and eat and commute and just do everything. And we've been taught to look at that in an isolated way. But as Albert Einstein said as well, if you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. So we need to develop a way that we can come up with solutions and a way of looking at our current problems that is different from how we've been doing it in the past. So we can't avoid to really have a fundamental discussion about our current way how we organize society and what it requires from us to develop or to create a more sustainable society, and what that means for like how we structure societal systems and our markets. So that requires a transformation, and transformations are complex, capricious, and precarious processes. So they have different causes and they go through different stages, and many different actors are being involved. So then the question is, why actually is embodiment so important in these changes? And up to now, we tend to kind of think about changes in a very cognitive way. So if we think through the problems and come up with solutions, then it will be better. And what we've seen up to now, that doesn't really do the trick. And also, one of the things is where I started with when I started talking about systems is that there's a lot of undercurrent dynamics. There's those interaction between the different players. And that altogether gives a certain behavior, and the behavior has certain consequences, and those consequences are the unintentional and undesired problems. So then, why embodiment? I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into 3 different reasons. The first one is, as I already said before, transformation is a complex and precarious process, which means that there's a lot of uncertainty involved. Complex, chaotic, uncertain, that causes us as humans to have primary reactions. As soon as there's something uncertain, it kind of touches our perception of safety. And if we don't feel safe, we get into our survival mode. So, and when we are in our survival mode, that means that we will react in a very primary way. And that could be that we start fighting the system, or that we kind of pull out and sit in our room and think, okay, I will wait till there's some change, but I don't know what to do myself. And although we may think that we have kind of these primary reactions under control and we can deal with the chaos, there is that the body reacts much faster than that our mind does. So our body has already reacted to the uncertainty before we even realize it mentally, before we can actually think about it. And it's something that can be seen in our current pandemic that we are in, is that many people kind of react in very primitive ways to the regulations, to everything that is going on, and that when that actually happens, our possibility to reflect on our reactions really diminishes. So it's something to bear in mind. So the more resilient we are to deal with uncertain and complex, chaotic situations, the more reflective we will be. So the better we can actually react to that, and the least our survival mode will come into play. As a pioneer, which you probably are, you also have to react with to deal with the reactions of others. So you will find resistance, because change will always cause resistance as well. So it's up to you to see how to deal with that resistance. And in dealing with that resistance, it's important to understand how we are hardwired, how those reactions actually work, and how you can deal with them. How you can deal with them. So the second one is that embodiment helps us to tap into our intuitive intelligence. Our bodies are super intelligent, and they have a very deep knowing whether something is right or not. So if we kind of turn off that ability of the body to know whether something is right or not, we also can't feel into the solutions that we propose. Or when we have more contact with our intuitive intelligence, it will also give us more creativity. So it allows us to come up with more creative solutions. So embodiment is a way to kind of tune into solutions that we come up with and see whether things are reasonable or can work or make sense, or how they relate to our human nature as well, or are they very mechanic, which they often are. And then we kind of feel distant to it. So it doesn't call us as humans, whereas the system is meant for us. We're not living for the system. The system should actually serve us. And what we now often see is that we serve the system. And that kind of has to swap. And tapping into our intuitive intelligence that the body holds will help us to be able to do that. And just to give you an example, I was once I was meeting somebody, and we were talking, and I noticed that although I tried to be very engaged in the conversation, my body was just pulling out, and I was just pressing harder and harder into my backrest. I didn't know why, but after a while, I actually brought that into the conversation. And so I said to the other person, I said, okay, I noticed that I'm kind of pulling out, or my body is pulling out. I don't know why, because I'm listening to what you're saying. But it didn't resonate with me. And my body was telling that. And after a whole conversation, we figured that he was kind of telling stories that didn't come from his heart. And apparently my body was reacting to the fact that he was giving me very mental information, but that wasn't in touch with his being as a human. It wasn't in touch with his heart and body, and that is what I noticed, and that's what I reacted to. And that is interesting information, because it gave him information as well, like, okay, where do I actually speak from? Why do I really want this? That gave him great insights. And then the last aspect, so we've seen how we have primary reactions in chaotic situations. So our survival mode gets on therefore it's important to be more embodied so we can kind of understand and deal with that better. Then we have seen how embodiment helps us to tap into our intuitive intelligence. And the third one is that the system speaks through somebody in the system. So I always believe that you're never alone in what you sense. So just imagine yourself to be in a meeting, and in the meeting you kind of, what I just said, I pulled out, or your vision may get a little bit blurry, or you notice some irritation or frustration. What I often hear people say about that is that they have to reflect on that themselves. So why am I irritated? Why am I getting blurry? That could be very well the truth. So it could be that, it touches something in your own history that makes you get a little bit irritated. But at the same time, it could be very well that the system speaks through you. So there's something in this system that is not aligned, and therefore you get your nervous system, your body is reacting actually to that is not aligned in the system. And to be able to bring that into the system will actually serve the system and will serve the actors or the people that are currently there in the system and looking at it. That it gives information. If we're not embodied, we may even not feel that. So that being embodied helps us to feel and notice and tune into the information that speaks through our bodies. And we all have had those situations in the past where you sensed something in your body or in your movement that wasn't just yours. It was actually a reaction to the system that more people also experienced. And I always say, if there's more people experiencing the same, there's something as a collective that we need to look at. If it's just me reacting to something, then it's me who has to look at it. Okay, so that are 3 reasons why I think that embodiment is important in societal systems change, and why I'd like to dive deeper into that in this podcast. And there will be much more to come in future podcasts to really get into the details of what I've just shared today. But for now, I hope that this gave you some insight and that you enjoyed listening to this. If you have any questions about this episode, don't hesitate to contact me. And I'm, of course, also really curious to what embodiment is for you and how you view that in societal systems change. So it would be great if you can say something or let me know something about that as well, so that we can kind of enhance this whole knowledge base of embodiment and societal systems change. So more about the relevance of embodiment in societal systems change in the next episode. But for now, great that you were here, and enjoy your day. Bye for now. Great that you listened to this episode of the Embodiment Talks. Please let me know your thoughts about this episode or the insights that you gained. Email me to the address in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with me, or if you have a question or topic that you want to know more about, don't hesitate to send me an email as well. Do you want to be kept up to date? Like this podcast in your favorite podcast app. You can help me by giving a thumbs up or leaving a comment so that this podcast will reach more people. You can find more information about my work on my website www.embodimentlab.nl or my YouTube channel Embodiment Lab. Thanks for listening, and meet you at the next episode.